So this is section 5 of unit 4. So today we are going to look at the internal rate of return. So you've looked at the payback period, you've looked at the accounting rate of return, you also looked at how to use the NPV to evaluate projects. So today we are going to look at the internal rate of return. So our section objective is our ability to estimate the internal rate of return using the try and error method and also the interpolation method, and explain how the decision criterion underlying the IRR method can be used to evaluate project. Alright, so it is important to note that companies' cost of capital may be the same, greater or lesser than its rate of return on investment. So the cost of capital is more like the amount that the company is paying on the resource that it is using, and the internal rate of return is the amount that the company is generating from using those investments. Hope you understand. So at each point of time, it will be viable if the company gets a higher internal rate of return than the cost of capital. So the internal rate of return is how much the company is getting, alright, and the cost of capital is how much the company is paying for using those funds. So 3 procedures can be used to find the internal rate of return. You have the try and error method, we also have the calculator solution, and also we have, of course, you can also use Excel to calculate your internal rate of return. So with the trial and error, alright, trial and error, so you try a discount rate to see if the equation solves to 0, and if it doesn't work, you try a different rate. That is what it means by trial and error. So you continue until you find the rate that forces the NPV to 0, and that rate will be the internal rate of return. Of course, with the calculator solutions, you use a financial calculator to estimate the internal rate of return when all the other information is available. Alright, so how do we calculate for the internal rate of return? So this is the formula for calculating the internal rate of return. We have RA plus NPV of A over NPV of A minus NPV of B. Alright, so they will always give you the cost of capital. Most of the time they will give you the cost of capital. Alright, so when they give you the cost of capital, you assumed another rate. Okay, you assume another rate. So let's that is higher than the cost of capital, of course. Yeah, so if the cost of capital is maybe 10%, you can assume another rate to be 12% or maybe 13%, right? And that one will represent your return for maybe B. So your return for A, you use the return for A to calculate for your NPV. Now you know how to calculate for NPV. So if you look at the formula, we have NPV of A. So the cost of capital that you are going to use to find your NPV of A is the return of A that is given, and you have NPV of B to, you can use the return of B to find your NPV of B. Alright, so it's going to be your return of A plus NPV of A over NPV of A minus NPV of B. Then you multiply by the product, or you multiply by the RB minus RA. That is the returns that you used in the question. So that is what you use to get your internal rate of returns. Alright, so what is the decision criteria or the decision rule for internal rate of return? Alright, so 1, if the internal rate of return is greater than the cost of capital, it means the investment is expected to return more than the required, and therefore the investor should accept the project. Alright, we also have a situation whereby the internal rate of return is less than the cost of capital. It means that the investment is expected to return less than or lesser than required, and therefore the investment or the investor should reject the project. So what if the internal rate of return is equal to the cost of capital? Alright, so it means that the investment is expected to return exactly what is required, and therefore the investor will be indifferent as to which one to choose, whether to reject or to accept the project. Alright, so if you are comparing the NPV and the internal rate of return rules, you are likely to arrive at the same decision on the acceptance or rejection of the project. However, because of the following conditions, the NPV rule can provide a suggestion that is different from that of the internal rate of return. So where we have mutually exclusive projects being compared, and also where the cash flows of a project are not conventional, and also where the discount rate charges, and also where the discount rate changes during the life of the project. Okay, so these are the key points to note. When you are faced with divergence view from these two techniques, that is the internal rate of return and the NPV, it is advisable, and let me underline the word advisable. It is advisable to choose the suggestion by the NPV rule, okay, because the NPV rule provides a more objective way of appraising projects. Alright, so the advice on the NPV method about mutually exclusive project is more tangible than that of the internal rate of return. And finally, the NPV method can easily incorporate changes in the discount rate, whereas the internal rate of return method does not take these changes into account. Alright, so that is it for this sections. And so this session we looked at the NPV, internal rate of return, and also the profitability index. Alright, this method offer more appreciable ways to evaluate investment projects. You should evaluate projects using either the NPV, IRR, and the PI. When you find yourself in such a situation, do not be disturbed. Just use the NPV rule to make your decision. So anytime you are to evaluate projects using these three, or whenever the question is open that you should evaluate this project and they don't give you the method or the technique to use, always go for the NPV rule to make your appraisal. Alright, so these are some questions for you. It's not difficult, try your hands on it, and I will see you in the last section of this unit. Thank you.